Chapter 28 Prisoner of War. Ino was roused by the sounds of gunfire and yelling. When she opened her eyes, sunlight dazzled her. The ceiling had collapsed, allowing natural light and air onto the bridge. Distant pops and snaps echoed through both the corridors and the outside environment. Ino looked around. She was trapped underneath a twisted metal hulk, which had come to rest over top her left leg. A searing pain that pulsed with each heartbeat told Ino that her leg was broken. Peering around, Ino did not recognize the bridge. The place was either mangled from the crash, or had fallen through the floor into the CIC. Or, perhaps, it had suffered both fates. Someone moved nearby, and Ino turned her head.
"What's going on?"
Ino started to say.
"Desticans landed nearby,"
said Zhao Hui.
"Take this and stay down."
Zhao Hui passed a carbine rifle to Ino and then turned away, running through a hole in the wall and shouting,
"I need some extra hands back here! The captain's hurt!"
Ino struggled to free herself, but the fallen rubble was either too heavy or being held in place. Ino had no choice but to wait for Zhao Hui to return with a rescue party. Just when Ino was starting to figure out where she was, the bridge had definitely fallen into the CIC. A sudden clash of gunfire reached her ears. The fighting had reached the stairwell connecting decks 3 and 4. Ino could hear people shouting in multiple languages: English, Savanti, and a guttural grunt that she guessed was Destican. Above her, Ino could hear the howling of high wind racing past the hole in the ceiling. Ino checked her rifle. Like everything else, it was battered, presumably during the crash. Unwilling to wait for Zhao Hui to come back with help, Ino started trying to extricate herself from the rubble again. Stabbing pain shot up her body, and Ino dared to hope that only her leg was broken. Her hopes were quickly dashed when she spotted her boots sticking out from under the wreckage. As far as she could tell, looking from this angle, her left ankle was dislocated. Her foot was sticking out in an unnatural way. Closing her eyes, Ino tried to shuffle and shimmy about. She was simultaneously trying to free herself and check for further injuries. Her left side was sore in general, and she assumed she had landed on it during the crash. All of her fingers were still attached and working correctly, which she considered a small miracle. But the biggest concern was a throbbing pain above her left ear.
I hit my head. Fuck,"
Ino said to herself. She started to mentally check herself, looking for signs of a concussion. And that was when new sounds reached her. The fighting was much closer at hand now. Ino could hear a familiar voice. "Barricade the doors!" Sota yelled. "Zhao Hui, where did you say the captain was?" Ino felt her heart leap. So the situation was not as bleak as it seemed. "Novikova, go with Zhao Hui," Sota ordered. Moments later, Zhao Hui returned with 3 more people. Space Marine Ruslana Novikova, EW Officer Frisco Mancini, and Chaplain Ren Oliver, who was unarmed.
"We've got you, Captain,"
said Ruslana. Novikova, Mancini, Zhao Hui, and Chaplain Oliver grabbed the twisted metal hulk and started to lift it off Ino. A clatter of footsteps sounded from the hall.
"Behind you!"
Ino shouted. The foursome turned around just in time to see a group of Desticans burst into the little ruined space. It all happened in about 3 seconds. First, there was an eruption of gunfire. People screamed, and Ino was momentarily blinded by the flash of a laser weapon. Then, Ino aimed her rifle through the gap between Zhao Hui and Chaplain Oliver. She pulled the trigger, but there was only a dull thudding noise from inside the damaged rifle. Finally, something large and heavy fell from above. Ino screamed as she took a head injury for the 2nd time. And then she was lost in a sea of darkness and silence. It was the pain that caused Ino to wake up. Images swam before her eyes. Voices spoke in a language she did not understand. Someone was carrying her. She was lying on a board, or a makeshift stretcher. The sun shone above, and the hazy green sky seemed to stretch out in all directions. A powerful agony stemming from her tibia bone distracted Ino. She barely saw the curved horns of the Destican stretcher-bearers on either side. And then there was darkness again. Ino was aboard one of the Destican frigates. It had landed a short distance away from the wrecked Marathon. As soon as she was inside, the smell of death hit Ino's nose, and she retched. She turned her head to the side, trying to look around. The interior of the Destican warship was dimly lit and Spartan. Rust was forming at the seams and joints, where corrosion was visible on some wires and piping. Ino was reminded of CSAT warships from the last war on Earth, built for cheap and maintained for less. Ino's captors carried her on an improvised stretcher for a few more minutes before arriving in a densely packed room. Ino glanced about, trying to figure out where they were. Strange machines lined the walls, each one positioned above a narrow bed. A few of these beds were taken up by Desticans who were being overseen by others. Some of them had plastic tubes running into their arms. Intravenous fluids. "This is a sick bay," Ino said to herself out loud. "That's what I thought too," said a familiar voice to her left. Chaplain Oliver was lying on one of the medical beds. She was being held down by one Destican, while another was using a sharpened tool to cut off the outer layer of her jumpsuit. Ino looked around and spotted 4 more humans in the sick bay. Aside from Chaplain Oliver, Acting Ensign Yamada, Chief Engineer Kazuki, Navigator Ashok Raha, and Boatswain Miracle Hamilton were also being restrained and searched. "Hands out of my pockets!" Kazuki shouted at his captors. "I was saving that for later." A Destican had found a handful of caffeine pills in Kazuki's pocket. He sniffed the pills and then ate them, chewing loudly. "Captain, your leg is broken," Acting Ensign Yamada said, tilting her head because the rest of her body was held down by thick straps. "Yeah, but no one's ever died from pain," Ino replied. "Anyone else hurt?" At that moment, Ino's captors deposited her stretcher on one of the empty beds and started to strap her down. "Gunshot wound," said Raha, who nodded at the injury on his shoulder. "Might have been friendly fire in the chaos, 'cause the Desticans were using energy weapons." The Desticans ignored the ongoing conversation. At first, Ino thought it was because they did not speak English. But then she realized that they were busy tending to their own wounded and dead, of which there seemed to be a lot. The sick bay was crowded with Destican soldiers and crew. This was the first time that Ino had ever seen one up close, aside from Mirage, so she was not able to tell at a glance what was wrong with each man. However, the disturbing abundance of blood on the floor and bodies under tables told Ino that she was looking at the casualties from the ongoing assault on the Marathon shipwreck. "How long was I out?" Ino asked. "About 15 minutes, Yamada replied. "Desticans landed and started coming aboard right after the crash." "What about our own people?" Ino raised her voice over the noise of a nearby Destican, who had started screaming in pain and agony, distracting his fellows. "Most of us survived the crash, I think," Kazuki said in an equally loud tone. "Those brutes just got organized a little faster than we did." Moments later, a group of enemy soldiers gathered around the 6 human captives. Ino and her comrades held their tongues, waiting. The troops spoke to one another in their own language, pointing at each human in turn as they did. Ino strained her ears to make any sense of this. The Desticans seemed to be having an argument, pointing back and forth to each other, to the human prisoners, and back again. "I'm not the best judge of alien character," Chaplain Oliver said over the din, "but I think the enemy discipline is starting to break down." One of the enemy soldiers broke from the group and slapped Oliver's face, hard. She cried out and held her eyes shut while the soldier shouted at her in his own language. Inwardly, Ino knew the chaplain was right. Something was going on with the Desticans. They seemed less cohesive, panicky, almost desperate. Without warning, the enemy soldiers started to undo the straps holding down Ino and her comrades. All 6 humans were forced to stand up. Ino put weight on her broken leg and immediately collapsed. Yamada and Kazuki put their arms around Ino and held her between them.
"She's hurt," Yamada tried speaking to the Desticans. "Please, can't we get her to see a medic?" "I don't think they speak English," Ino panted. "And I doubt they signed the Geneva Conventions," Oliver added in a dry tone. Ino and the others were marched out of the sick bay, down a hall, and pushed into a claustrophobic little space. Ino wondered if they were in the brig. A tearing sound caused Ino to look around. "Are you kidding? It's freezing in here!"
Oliver protested as the rest of her jumpsuit was cut away by the same soldier from before. Suddenly standing in just her underlayer, Oliver watched as the enemy soldiers searched her jumpsuit, trying to grab something in one of the pockets. Oliver realized what they were trying to reach and turned to Ino.
"Pocket texts," she explained. "I keep pocket-sized copies of holy books on me. They probably think it's intel."
Ino felt something akin to an electric charge run through her body. She had just remembered her own pockets. Taking advantage of the fact that her enemies were distracted again, she quickly rifled through her own pockets. She found her military ID card and bent it, destroying the integrated circuit chip inside and ensuring it could never be used to access a Coalition computer. Then she found a tiny portable data drive in her pocket. Roughly the size of her thumbnail, this little device could store untold terabytes of military data, and Ino used it almost daily in her duties on the bridge. Ino jammed her thumbnail into a narrow slot on one side of the data drive and pressed a miniature switch concealed inside. Although the device made no noise, Ino knew the data drive was quietly erasing its contents. Taking no chances, she stuffed the device into her mouth and chewed on it as hard as she could. The data drive was crushed in her teeth, and she spat out bits of plastic. One of the enemy soldiers saw this and realized what Ino was doing. Seconds later, all of the human captives were being grabbed and searched. Forced to stand on her broken leg, Ino screamed. The stabbing pain in her leg was so intense she almost failed to notice where the Desticans were grabbing her. But a yelp from Hamilton caught her attention.
"Hey, hands off, perverts!"
Before Ino could react, the women were suddenly separated from the men and searched much more thoroughly. Ino was very glad she could not understand the Destican language because she could guess what they were saying. The groping stopped as suddenly as it started when Ino's jumpsuit was cut away from her body, causing her military ID card to fall on the floor. One of the enemy soldiers picked up the card, examined it for a moment, then loudly yelled to get his comrade's attention. Hamilton and Yamada, who were fighting intensely against what was clearly an imminent sexual assault, suddenly fell to the floor as their captors released them and gathered around the soldier who found Ino's ID. Both young women scrambled to the spot where Kazuki and Raha were being held. Oliver joined them a moment later. Ino was grabbed and forced to hold still while her face was compared to the picture on the ID. "Oh, fuck, they've been told to look for you again," Kazuki said aloud. Realizing the danger, Kazuki, Raha, and Hamilton started trying to fight their captors again. A violent struggle broke out in the brig, and Ino was unceremoniously dropped on the floor. She tried to curl up into a ball to shield her broken leg from even more harm, but someone grabbed her by the back of the undershirt and pulled her into the hallway. Ino was separated from her crewmates. A pair of Desticans dragged her through another corridor, and Ino knew that if she had been recognized, she was going to be in for a whole new world of suffering. She was pulled into some kind of conference room. Narrow chairs stood around a hexagonal table, where one of the walls took the shape of a floor-to-ceiling digital screen. But it was not the screen Ino noticed. There was already someone in the room. A group of 8 Desticans were surrounding a pair of captives. Reza Agdashlu, looking very battered, was sitting in one of the high-backed chairs. And next to him was... Azarin! Ino cried out. The Astro Creator and her marine escort looked around and spotted Ino. As soon as Ino had spoken, the Destican guards started to forcefully pull Reza and Azarin out of the room. How? Ino gasped. Caught us a few hours ago. Crashed nearby, Azarin replied. One of the Desticans put his hand over Azarin's mouth. If we're going to do something, we need to do it fast, Reza called to Ino as he was pulled through the door. They're disorganized! Reza and Azarin were pulled from the room. Then Ino was made to sit down in the seat Reza had just vacated. The image of a Destican officer appeared on the view screen. Ino held still while the enemy soldiers communicated with each other. For a few moments, she allowed her eyes to glaze over. Her broken leg was swelling up, and the pain was threatening to overwhelm her. But then, Ino noticed something. In the bottom right corner of the video, a white square flickered like a broken light. On and off. On and off. On and off. But it was not rhythmic. The square blinked and vanished like old neon lights, sometimes appearing in short bursts and other times in longer bursts. Wait a minute. No way. Ino refocused her gaze on that flashing square, ignoring the rest of the screen and the Desticans around her. She watched each flash of the little square, making a note of how long it was illuminated whenever it appeared. Slowly at first. Then, all at once, the Morse code message came together in Ino's mind. A X M T O I N O. Ino felt a chill rush through her body. Did she dare to hope that Axiom, the ship's AI, had survived the crash? Axiom, the only one ordered to communicate in Morse code if there was a dire emergency? If so, how had he done it? Ino had no time to ask questions. She needed to figure out how to respond. Looking around, she understood that the view screen was similar to most visual communication systems used by spacefaring civilizations. Somewhere in the room was a series of hidden cameras. The Destican currently talking on the view screen could see Ino, and vice versa. If Axiom had somehow compromised the view screen system, then he could see Ino as well. Ino could not try to speak aloud or move her lips. That would give away the fact that she was communicating to someone. No, she needed something more subtle. Thinking fast, Ino realized that Axiom could probably see her face. Ino closed her eyes for a moment, thinking of a way to make this look natural. Then she forced herself to think about the time when her parents had asked Ino to stay home and guard the house while they took her sister Venka on an expensive American vacation. As the memory of being abandoned came flooding back, Ino started to cry. Then she tried to blink the tears out of her eyes. Ino's eyelids fluttered open and shut like the wings of a butterfly, creating her own message in Morse code. S O S W I A P O W. Axiom's reply flashed in the corner while Ino's captors spoke to the unknown officer on the view screen. N M B R P O W S. Number of POWs. Ino blinked back. E I G H T. Axiom's reply came back quickly. S T A N D B Y. At that moment, Ino was grabbed by the shoulder. One of the Destican soldiers was shouting angrily at the screen. The officer on screen seemed to be exasperated. He stood up and walked off camera. Ino was painfully pulled to her feet again, and she was almost marched out of the room when a harsh voice called her captors back. Araj Zilfalin had appeared on the screen. He spoke in a dangerous tone, and Ino was roughly deposited into her seat again. Araj peered at Ino with an expression of lecherous joy, but Ino ignored him. Another message from Axiom was blinking in the bottom corner of the screen. A N Y H V I W I T H U. Any high-value individuals with you? Ino forced herself to look up at Araj once more. The stars have been kind to me this day, Araj said. I will claim both my world and my prize. Ino looked away from Araj, casting her gaze down to the table, and blinked out one last message. A Z A R Y N L I V E S.
As you're on your way back home, something catch your eyes untold. Fear of darkness lingers here. You tremble as you get the fear. Now you're on the cornerstone, fearing you'd be left alone. Who will lose? Who will prevail? Who will take?